Katharine Streip is an associate professor in the Liberal Arts College at Concordia University in Montreal, Quebec. She has a Ph.D. in Comparative Literature from UC Berkeley and has published articles on William S. Burroughs, Jean Rhys, Marcel Proust, Philip Roth, James Joyce, Franz Kafka, the Beat's influence on Canadian literature, and zombies. Her research interests include beat literature and culture, avant-garde movements, media theory, new materialisms, subjectivity, comedy, the novel, affect theory, popular culture, and eco-criticism. She's currently writing on humanism, post-humanism, and transhumanism, and beat narrative, and we're here to talk about the Odyssey, a text that Katharine has taught
for many years.
For many years, okay.
Yeah.
At Concordia.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting in on some of her classes. So the first question is, why is the Odyssey such an important text?
Foundation text for all of Western literature. Every major epic that has been written after the Odyssey refers back to it. The Aeneid is reacting to the Odyssey. Dante's Divine Comedy, Odysseus appears. Milton, little bits of the Odyssey. Moby Dick, the Odyssey. James Joyce's Ulysses.
Very much so, yeah.
24 hours in the life of a normal man as viewed through the perspective of Odysseus reaching home in Ithaca.
So it's a bit like the Bible in that sense.
Yeah, very much so. And for the ancient Greeks, the Odyssey, Homer's works, the Iliad and the Odyssey functioned as the Bible did for Judeo-Christian culture. You know, even though Plato didn't believe in literary fiction, he still refers to the Odyssey. It was their, again, bedrock book for their culture. And because, why else? Because so many of the themes that we still write about are expressed in the Odyssey. It's a remarkable book, but at this point I'd have to give you a list of themes, and I don't want to do that. So.
Okay. Well, I'm going to pick out a theme because...
That's easier.
Yeah, despite the fact that the stage was set right at the very beginning, it wasn't till about book 20 out of 24 that I realized that this was a Tarantino movie.
I love that. Explain.
It's all about revenge.
It is.
It's all about those suitors.
Yeah.
Throughout the whole Odyssey, he's thinking about how he's going to kill those suitors who are trying to bed his wife Penelope at home.
Not throughout the whole Odyssey, because he really doesn't learn about the suitors till he goes to Hades.
Okay, but it's on the first page that it's presented.
But that's the narrator giving you an overview.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
and
what
the
I was saying
narrator's doing a lot of work on that first page beyond revenge. I'm not arguing with you that revenge doesn't play an important motive here, and if Tarantino were making a movie of it, for sure, that would be what he would emphasize. But I think if it were nothing more than an epic about revenge, it wouldn't have the power that it has. Because what keeps Odysseus going is not thoughts about, I'm going to kill those suitors, but he's thinking of his family. And he's thinking,
I want to get back to her.
I want to get back home. I want to get back to my family. I had a student this year who came up with a wonderful way of talking about the Odyssey, and he said one of the reasons Odysseus wants to go back is he cannot be himself when he's stuck on an island. He needs to be in Ithaca to be Odysseus. He needs his family. He needs his home. He needs his kingdom.
So it's his identity that's sort of ripped away from him.
Exactly. So, and identity is more than just anger and I need revenge.
So yes, certainly. I mean, if it's a foundational text, there has to be more than that. But I'm telling you, when I finished the book, it's the whole slaughter of 108 suitors is ringing in my ears.
Of course.
And it seems to me that that's pretty central.
This is a book that, because I teach it once a year, every year, you need to read it more than once.
Yeah.
That of course, the first time you read it what is going to make the largest impact is the slaughtering of 108 suitors. But then you go back and you might notice other little things, like in the very introduction. What struck me this time is the lines, 3 lines in, "Many were they whose cities he saw, whose minds he learned of, and then many the pains he suffered." And the reason that struck me is because that's an aspect about Odysseus that gets picked up by Dante and others, that he has also this craving for experience, this desire to learn, this desire to see. That's why when going by the sirens, he wants to hear the siren song.
Right, he's very curious, isn't he?
Yeah. And other epic heroes, you don't get, you get passions, you get anger, you get love, but you don't get this sort of curiosity.
This intelligence.
That's another thing. I mean, I've just finished teaching the Aeneid, and Aeneas is, a wonderful, pious, dutiful, sacrifices himself for his people, but intelligence I would not put as one of his chief characteristics.
Okay.
It's the delight in watching Odysseus work his way out of difficulties, think his way through problems which seem unsolvable. And the suitors are just, in that sense, another unsolvable problem.
Another obstacle.
Yeah. 108. I think we can do it with the help of the gods and a few good men. Just like with the Cyclops. My son, absolutely.
This was something else that struck me was Penelope, his wife, who is incredibly virtuous. I mean, 20 years putting off a whole bunch of suitors who are...
She knows how to lie, too.
True.
The shroud.
But
weaving and saying...
Yeah.
I mean, she's crafty in her way.
Definitely, yeah.
The conversations with Odysseus, where both of them, "You are so strange."
Yeah, why do they both say that when they finally... We're jumping ahead here because this is when they finally get together.
Yeah.
But they both say that, and they don't say it just once. It's
like foreplay in a way, kind of romantic foreplay. And I interrupted you when you said she is so virtuous, and I guess what I wanted to say is that even though Penelope doesn't have a lot of room in the epic, one of the nice things about the Homer that wrote the Odyssey is he gives a little more attention to females than in other epics. You see flashes of her that suggest a more complex woman, that suggests why Odysseus loves her and why he wants to come back to her.
That's my question. First of all, how does she hold the interest of all these guys for 20 years? Like, there's something extraordinary about her to be able to do that. But the other point I want to make is that it seems like, and she says this often, the person that she's going to choose is the one that gives her the biggest gift. Like, it's not about intelligence. It's like, okay, whoever gives me the biggest gift, I'm going to go with. That doesn't sound to me like an intelligent woman.
No. But there's a strategic reason why she does that. Odysseus is home. It's debatable whether she recognizes him or not, but she, to all intents and purposes, she doesn't overtly recognize him, although some of the scenes between them, you can say, what's going on here? I'll come back to those. Okay, your first question as to she holds them off for 20 years. She's not holding them off for 20 years because the first 10 years he's away fighting.
And they're not hitting on her at that point?
No, because he's still alive for all intents and purposes.
Yeah,
they don't start hitting on her till he doesn't come home for a long time and they figure he must be dead. Okay. But even so, that suggests she's older, right? And
typically men go after beautiful young women.
Typically, yes. So some of the appeal that she has does have to do with property, because it's pretty clear that what the suitors want to do is kill Telemachus and just take over Ithaca. And the only way you can take over Ithaca, an easy way to take over Ithaca is to marry Penelope. Two, when you marry her, you're going to get some goods, some dowry also. But the scene I'm thinking of where she asks for gifts, Athena makes her even more beautiful than she is, and she asks for gifts, and Odysseus is very pleased and proud of her, because from his perspective what she's doing is getting more goods from the suitors that he will be able to keep. He's happy about that, and I think that's why she's doing it. It's a way of stalling, and two, She like him, I mean, what is Odysseus? You were saying she's not very intelligent when she asks for gifts. What is Odysseus doing as he travels?
No, but I guess my point is, if she's willing to accept as the best suitor just someone who's going to give her the most gift, why isn't she looking for someone who's smart?
Yeah, but these suitors aren't smart.
Right.
So you don't, I mean, you don't...
None of them?
And, no, but what she eventually says is, I'm willing to marry the person who can do this impossible feat of using this bow to shoot through these arches. Yeah. And she knows only one man can do this. Right. So getting the gifts is a way of, before we do this, let's get as much property out of you.
So she gets to keep the gifts even if they don't get married?
Absolutely, they're dead. No, it's not she gets to keep them. Odysseus gets to keep them. So I don't. Again, I think they're
maybe she's not so stupid.
No, I think they're a very good match because Odysseus, wherever he travels, even with the Cyclops, I'm hoping with the rules of hospitality that I will get some presents out of this.
Yeah.
Because or with the Phaeacians, he really needs gifts from them. So when he arrives back in Ithaca, he's not just a man without anything, So I don't see that much of a difference between what she's doing in her circumstances and what he's doing. It's all about property and getting more.
Right.
That to me strikes me as pretty clever.
Kind of like the Clintons.
Oh God.
Let's move on to guest-host relations.
Yeah.
And the fact that Zeus says that strangers are sacred. That's another important theme, isn't it?
Yeah. It was a fundamental rule for Greek society at this time that if you went to someone's house and asked them for hospitality, they had to host you. Mm-hmm. Before even knowing who you were, they had to feed you, they had to offer you a bath, they had to give you a place to sleep, and only after all that could you say, who are you? And I think one of the reasons was this allowed that society, it was like grease for the society to function. Your grandparent had hosted someone in the past, and now you were friends with them. There was a kind of tie. If you showed up at someone's place and that person could kill you, there would be no way of creating allegiances or friendships. There were some strict rules, like a beggar couldn't show up at a king's house and expect to get the kind of treatment that you would look for someone of your particular social class, which is why when Odysseus returns to Ithaca, he goes to the swineherd, to the slave, because for all intents and purposes, he is nobody. Mm-hmm. And it would make sense that a beggar would that's the person who would host him. Although, ironically, Eumaeus is also the son of a king.
Eumaeus?
The swineherd who hosts him, who arranges the sort of, helps set up the meeting between Telemachus and Odysseus.
When Odysseus comes back to Ithaca. In disguise. Let's, just because of the fact that these suitors abuse this hospitality, they get punished big time.
They do.
So why is this such an important theme in the book?
Because religiously, hospitality is sacred to Zeus, and culturally, the society could not work if people abuse hospitality. Okay. So for anthropological reasons as well as for religious reasons. A more interesting offshoot of that would be, and people have struggled with this, it makes sense why the suitors are killed, because they are breaking the kind of culture rules, not just with hospitality, but with, trying to assassinate Telemachus and swearing against the gods and being offensive and not respecting the aged. They're just, some people have
being reckless.
Their fathers, the people who should have taught them, all went to the Trojan War. So these are men who have been raised without fathers. And fortunately, Telemachus had Penelope, who raised him well, because you get the sense that.
And Athena too, the goddess,
who comes down and intervenes. Yeah. But these suitors are fatherless. But the slave women who are killed in a horrible way. They're hanged. They're slaves, so some critics would say, but they had no choice to sleep with these men, and they're killed anyway. That people have wrestled with more, but
this is Odysseus killing the slave.
he has a son.
women.
He has Telemachus kill the women who slept with the suitors
Right.
at the very end.
And I thought the reason for that was that they were being disloyal.
They were being disloyal on one sense, but on the other sense, every time you read the word servant at this time, it means slave, right? On the other sense, how much power did they really have? Did they have a choice? There's
What kind of agency did they have?
That people have wondered about that. I mean, from the functioning of the household, you probably don't want servants or slaves who have consorted with the enemy in this way, so you might as well get rid of them. That's one of the moments where I kind of go, ooh, this is, it's unfortunate, but what can you do?
Murder is just
Yes.
when you're putting your house in order.
Absolutely. And every Clint Eastwood movie to this day, if we're looking for a kind of cinematic,
Sure.
Someone wrongs you and you're going to go back and avenge your family, you're going to, yeah, murder is just if you're setting your house in order. That also ties into the theme of individualism, which I think is really prominent in the Odyssey too. And I was thinking of this today. Most classical epics do not end happily. I don't know if you know the ending of the Aeneid, but Aeneas kills Turnus, his shade goes down to...
I didn't get to read that because I was away, but you were teaching it, and I really wanted to, but that'll be for future episodes. Yeah.
Or the end of Homer, the Iliad. Odysseus is one of the few epics that the father, the grandfather, and the son are all aiming at their enemies.
Yeah.
Athena comes down and
they all
stops
put their armor on together.
Yeah. Athena comes down and keeps it from going into a bloodbath. In a way, it's as close as you can get to a happy ending. He's home, his wife is alive, his son is alive.
Yeah. He has to take off again, though, and get some work done with Poseidon. But
he's
still.
He's still...
he's pretty happy.
Compared to others where it's like just blood and carnage.
You mentioned that Athena stops a bloodbath, but I think without her, there's no way they could have taken killed all those suitors, because there was only like 5 of them or 6 of them versus 100.
Not only that, but families have families. It would have been an endless cycle of revenge, which is another reason why.
There's my theme again.
Yes, no, but yes, revenge is an important theme, but something happens at the end to stop the fighting, the killing. That a new kind of justice is inaugurated, where it's not just endless, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It's over, it's finished, stop your fighting.
Is that how does that happen?
It makes me think of, there's a group of plays called the Oresteia by Aeschylus, and it's all about Agamemnon's son kills his mother and his stepfather for killing Agamemnon. The story that is constantly referred to in the Odyssey. So the Furies come after this young man, and it looks like he'll be suffering with guilt forever. And then Athena, in the final play, she transforms the Furies, the earth spirits, the blood spirits, the revenge spirits into the Eumenides. And it's sort of a move from blood justice to court justice. And I think that the Odyssey, in a funny way, the ending a little bit anticipates that there's a kind of justice which is transcendent to just someone in your family has been killed, now you have to go and kill.
Yeah.
I think you could read the ending in that way.
It's a bit like moving from the Old Testament to the New Testament with forgiveness.
Yeah. I mean, there's not really forgiveness, but it's just stop your fighting enough. But it's again, the sequel, one can only imagine what happens the next day.
The fact that revenge is delayed is a technique of the epic.
Yeah.
Because again, it's mentioned on the first page, and then you have to wait for the whole poem for it to be fulfilled.
Have you read Moby Dick?
I've read it up until he starts describing all of the cetaceans.
Yeah.
And that's where
That's very early in the book. The first time I taught it here, one of my students said, 600 pages and it's only in the last 45 pages and he's actually chasing the whale. So this is a technique that you see in epic. Didn't you find it kind of a confusing book to read also because of the way in which the story is told, the sort of flash forwards, flashbacks, very sophisticated, and again it makes me think of film. It opens in the middle, he's on an island with this woman, and then in the middle of the book, you get the backstory.
Him leaving Troy. And,
Leaving Troy, why he is on this island for 7 years and all the places he's been before that. And then the Phaeacans, how he goes from Calypso to the Phaeacan Islands. It's a very sophisticated kind of narration. It's not straightforward, step after step. So that too contributes to, as you say, we don't really get to the revenge till the very end. And you have to imagine people listening to this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
You were asking me about, what ways to encourage people to get through the book. And this year, a number of my students listened to it. They found the best readers they could, and they listened to it while reading it. And this seemed to help them read it for the first time.
Because it is a struggle. It's not an easy read.
Not for us. No. Because it's
repetitive, of course.
I was about to say in class, I remember you saying, it's repetitive, and of course it has to be because these bards were singing over the course of 6 nights for many hours. And they were singing in poetry, so you needed phrases that would fit the meter. So, every time you came to Juno, it would be ox-eyed Juno, or...
well, plus they also need sort of prompts to remind themselves of what comes next.
So this is very unlike the kind of fiction that we're used to reading. But on the other hand, hearing it as a kind of story, I speculate sometimes is the very sophisticated narrative because everyone knows the story so well that they're delighting in how you get to the ending. The sort of circuitous way in which you arrive at something that you know is coming, but you're enjoying the process as much as you enjoy the satisfaction, the catharsis of he's finally killing them. And there also is a kind of build-up. And I think this comes back to the idea that Odysseus is regaining his identity because you see it being taken away from him as he loses his men, as he loses all agency. And even with the Phaeacans, what if they hadn't given him gifts? What if the bard hadn't remembered who he was and sung about him? Who would he be without this kind of legend behind him? How would he have appeared in Ithaca with nothing? Not very, it's
he was very concerned about showing up with gifts and
because
gold and whatever.
You judge someone based on what they own. It hasn't
very changed.
It's foundation text for the West in some ways.
Let's look at Calypso. He was with her for 7 years.
Right. And we should look at Circe also.
Okay. But let's start with Calypso and this double standard, basically, because first of all, he's having a great time with her for 7 years.
Yeah.
This isn't just like a little fling. This is a long-term thing.
Right.
And yet he still kind of yearns to get back to his wife.
Right.
He turns down immortality, but he's being unfaithful.
Right.
And she is not, despite really having to fight off all sorts of guys.
Yeah.
So the question is, what kind of character is he? Is he, based on their times?
Yeah.
Sure, I mean, he's a decent guy, but in our times,
Okay, I'm going to reframe a little bit your portrayal of the situation in that she's a goddess. Calypso is a goddess, so yes, the book suggests when he first arrives with her, they have a great time together. But it doesn't say how long that lasts, and it's pretty, I mean, it could have, like, within a month, he could have wanted to get away. Within 6 years. We don't know.
Yeah.
We know by the time, when the book opens, he's sitting, he's weeping, he's looking at Ithaca. Doesn't sound like he's having a great time.
Yeah.
So the question is, the way you're saying it, well, couldn't he have gotten away from her earlier? Couldn't he have done something? She is a goddess. He's lost all his men. He has no agency.
Yes, but in fact,
he could kill himself, but that's not Odysseus.
No. But it's interesting because I was reading specifically for that.
Yeah.
And on page, now we should mention it. Yeah, we should. It's the Richmond Lattimore translation.
Yeah.
Published by Harper Perennial.
Yeah.
And on page 118, book 7, it's not him who decides that he wants to go. She tells him to go. So again, she is in love with him. Right? Yeah.
When she first tells him, you can go now, his response is, I don't believe you, because he's so suspicious of her.
Yeah, and that's interesting too. There's lots of suspicion in this book, right? Everyone.
He's Penelope is testing him. He's testing. But I would frame it a little differently. I would say that he lands on that island and he has nothing except maybe his sexuality, and that's the only thing which keeps him alive because she falls in love with him for that. But he can't go to her and say, "I'm leaving now." He has, she's a woman in love with him,
and she's a goddess.
There's, in terms of the double standard, it's really interesting because when Hermes goes down to her and says, "Okay, it's time. You've got to let him go. He's fated to return to Ithaca. Athena has been asking Zeus, let him go." She complains and says, "You gods have a double standard." Same thing that Penelope suffers from. You can have all the affairs you want with female mortals, but when a goddess gets involved with a male mortal, you don't like it and you take it away from us or you make something go wrong. So people have said, hey, again, it's a patriarchal society, but at least you have Homer giving voice to these women and the unfairness.
And their complaint.
Yeah. Because that's kind of an interesting speech. And you also watch the way in which Odysseus talks to her. When she says, "Okay, you can leave," it's not just, "Great, I'm out of here." It's, first it's suspicion because he's been absolutely beaten down for 7 years, and we don't know, has he, asked in the past, or has he thought to himself, I can't live if she gets angry at me because she's the only thing that's keeping me alive. My only chance of getting away is to be her consort here. So after he's convinced that she's telling the truth, and she starts asking, saying, "Look, stay with me. I love you.
I'll make you immortal.
I'll make you immortal. I'll make you a god. What's so great about Ithaca? What's so great about Penelope?" And he's very careful when he responds to her. He doesn't come out and say, "Because I love Penelope much more than you." He's
wily.
He's strategic, which is, I think, what he had to be all through those 7 years. You see Odysseus lose his head a few times, like with the Cyclops. And he would have lost his head with the sirens if they had untied him. But on the whole, he's suspicious. So anyway, he strategically, he says, "Look, Calypso, Penelope can't compare with you. You're a goddess. But I love my home. I need my home, and I want to go home." And this soothes her vanity. She knows she has to let him go anyway because of Zeus, but she's not angry with him.
So very clever on his part.
Very clever on his part, and you see this over and over again when he approaches people, except for the Cyclops.
Where bravado gets in the way a bit.
Or ego, or vaunting, or because this is also a culture of bragging, of wanting to be known for your feats, of wanting to be acknowledged. I mean, the only chance any of these heroes had for immortality was through storytelling afterwards. You know, if people were
keeping
not
them
singing,
alive through the stories.
exactly.
Yeah.
If people weren't singing about them, they go to Hades and they're forgotten. So,
Incidentally, let's just paint in that Cyclops picture. He's basically sucked. He's one up the Cyclops, and he's escaped after being caught in his cave.
Yes.
And some of his men have been eaten
in front of him.
In front of him. It's awful.
Yeah.
But then he escapes, and then instead of just escaping, he kind of goes,
yes, exactly.
and my name is Odysseus too. And so that gets reported back to Poseidon, who's
the father of the Cyclops.
Yeah, and he doesn't like Odysseus anyway.
No.
So this is perhaps an example of Odysseus. At that stage, he's letting that loose.
Yes.
But he matures over time to a point where he probably wouldn't do something like that later on.
He has more self-control.
Yeah.
And in fact, when he reaches the suitors and he's disguised as a beggar, and the suitors are being incredibly rude to him and throwing stools at him and kicking him, and he's thinking to himself, I could just rip them in two. Or there's one wonderful scene where he hears the serving women going to the suitors at night, and he is furious. And he thinks to himself, I feel my fury, my heart, but remember what happened with the Cyclops. It's possible to read him as a kind, there's a character arc where if he hadn't gone through that experience with the Cyclops, he may not have been so successful in Ithaca. But he's learned that he has to control his temper in order to get what he wants, that if he's too passionate, too impetuous. And also there's so much more at stake here, because what will happen if he gives way to the suitors? Penelope, Telemachus, everyone's life is in his hands. That's why he has to be so careful with his wife and not give way to his feelings. That's why when he sees the dog, he can't reach out and pet the dog. There's all these moments showing what a trial it is for him. Again, so much more than just revenge, I think. That he does get the satisfaction of revenge, but it's more than just a revenge.
Yeah. One thing that hangs over him, too, is all this time is the threat that Penelope might actually give in to the suitors.
Yeah.
And so he's pretty concerned about that.
Very much so.
Well, I guess if she takes off and gets married to one of them, that's one thing. But if she just has sex with one of them, he looks at her as being tainted goods? Is that?
No, I don't. I think it's more... remember when he goes to Hades and meets with Tiresias? And he discovers what has happened to Agamemnon. And the Agamemnon story, Agamemnon being killed by his wife and his wife's consort, comes up again and again and again in the Odyssey, both as a kind of example to Telemachus, be like Agamemnon's son, and as a warning to Odysseus, watch out for what Penelope might do.
Yeah. So women as betrayers.
As betrayers. I think the fear is... he would return to Ithaca, and again, his identity is lost, because if she's with another man, how easy would it be to kill Odysseus, coming back? And he loves her.
Yeah.
He loves her.
Well, and that, when you're in passionate love with someone,
yes.
your antennae are up, and you are scared that they're going to leave you for someone else.
Absolutely.
Like jealousy is...
and maybe the fact that he hasn't been that faithful might make him a little more sensitive to the possibility that, it could happen with her too.
Right.
No matter what kind of justification you give for his consorting with those two goddesses, in the back of his mind, he must be thinking, we're all human. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
20 years is a long time.
Yeah. Or 10, as you say. Or,
yeah. Well, he's been away from her for 20 years.
Yes, but they've only been hitting on her for, as you've said earlier, for less than that. But still, it's a long time that she's putting up with this.
Yeah.
This is something that bugged me throughout the whole thing. Not bugged me, I couldn't understand it. And that was this reference to the fact it wasn't just food being eaten away by the suitors.
Yes.
It's most frequently referred to as possessions will wretchedly be eaten away.
Yes.
They eat up the house. They eat property. But they don't say just eat food.
Yeah.
So what's that all about?
There's a number of references to them eating beef, sort of on a nightly basis. The animals that they're slaughtering would have only been eaten at the time of feast days. So this, these herds of cattle represent wealth or property, and they're just going through it, and they're drinking the wine, and they're
but eating,
consuming resources.
Yeah, as I say, it just seems like something about eating that is really significant.
Yeah, they're consuming resources in a flagrant and sacrilegious way. They're behaving with extremes as opposed to moderation, which
is reckless.
Which is reckless, and I think it also it's the antithesis of how you're supposed to behave as a guest. So it goes against this sort of fundamental idea that holds society together at this time.
Yeah.
If your guest shows up and refuses to leave, eats your property, doesn't give reciprocal gifts in return, that threatens the whole sort of foundation of what makes this society work.
Yeah, and it would fall apart.
It would fall apart.
Which is what. Right. That's the worst chaos that you can.
You would have sort of anarchy.
There's a line in the book that says nobody really knows his father. I thought that was quite striking.
A line, isn't it?
Yeah, because they're apart for 20 years, and it's his whole life basically. Telemachus' whole life, and then when they do get together and recognize, Telemachus is told that I'm your father. They mourn the loss of all of this time.
When Telemachus says that to Athena in disguise, it sort of suggests the state that this young man is in that he's been told Odysseus is his father. He's been told he looks like Odysseus. That's almost a kind of slur against his mother, too, when he makes that comment. Because if Odysseus is not his father, that means Penelope has slept with someone else. I think that comment is there to show just how demoralized Telemachus is and how much in need of help, outside help, he is in order to be ready for Odysseus when Odysseus returns.
That's right, because he's accused of being childlike before and not being able to make a decision and not being courageous or strong in the face of the suitors. Athena helps him through this, but still, it makes sense that his father sort of abandoned him. No wonder he's so fragile.
And look at the men that he's surrounded by, the suitors, bad behavior. That's one of the reasons why Athena does come back and suggests that he visits Menelaus and other Greek men who knew Odysseus back at Troy, sort of like a junior year abroad or something
so that he could learn something about his father?
Learn something about his father and learn something about himself, because the first thing all these people say when they meet him is, "Oh, you look just like Odysseus." And he sort of confirm that yes, you are the son. And they tell him stories about, what Odysseus was like as a young man or other young men, what they're doing, to sort of get him out of his depression and help him prepare him for what he's going to need to be able to do when Odysseus returns.
That was another interesting thing. It's like he's yearning for his dad to come back so that they can kill the suitors. It's like he can't do it unless his dad's with him.
No. And his first sort of fantasy, if only my father were... When we first meet him, he speaks of his father as if he were dead. He won't even let himself entertain the thought of he's still alive, he's coming. But he fantasizes, if my father were alive, he would kill all the suitors. And it's not, if my father were alive, we would kill all the suitors. It's like he still wants Daddy to come home and fix things.
But when he does come back, the two of them do work together.
They do.
And Telemachus, everyone marvels at how he's changed, and he's actually, he's got a whole bunch of confidence now that his dad's back with him. It's changed him.
And even before, after Athena speaks to him, he speaks to his mother in a different way. He tells the suitors, he speaks to them in a way that surprises them because they're used to him being passive and youthful.
And this is because Athena said something to him?
I think so, yeah. I think it's...
She just sort of said, buck up and...
Yeah. I mean, that's that's why the delay at the beginning, where we don't immediately go to Odysseus going to Phaeaca, but we spend 3 books with Telemachus. It's as if the book begins at a point in time in Ithaca where things are so urgent that Odysseus needs to get home now, building up the suspense for people.
This is a translation thing, but it bugged me. The wine blue sea. That's what Lattimore calls it. I'm used to the wine dark sea. Wine blue sea just doesn't work for me. Blue wine doesn't work for me.
Yeah, see if you can find it.
It's all over. It's all over the place.
No, but
You want to see it?
I'd love to see it. I'm just curious.
Sure. Why? You don't believe me?
No, I do believe you, absolutely. But sometimes looking at the context, that can help me.
Sure.
You know, my speculation is, I read a book on the history of the color blue, that there's a kind of blue-violet, which is very deep, very dark, almost like a purple blue. And that may be what they're referring to. But, okay, good.
Here's one of them right there.
Wine blue open water.
But again, it's every time he refers to it. It's wine blue.
Yeah. It's fun. I wasn't sensitive to that, so thank you for pointing that out to me. He too had gone out on the wine blue open water in his hollow ships. He too had gone out on the wine dark open water. That's so interesting because he's bringing the idea of wine and he's bringing the idea of blueness. Blue makes sense. Wine makes sense. What happens when you join them? It's fascinating. And at that point, I went to my computer and type in wine blue and see if anybody has written about this. But
sure, okay. But it's interesting because that particular phrase there brings in another thing that stuck with me, and that was every time that you refer to a ship, it's a hollow ship. So what's the thing about hollow? Like hollow is all over this book.
You know, to really, here's where you would need your classicist, because you'd have to see what the original was. You'd have to see what the, you'd have to know the original Greek to know why Lattimore made that particular translation decision.
Sure.
And you'd also want to look at other translations.
But as I say, the translation, okay, but the fact is hollow is really significant because it's all over the book.
I know, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and that, but it's hollow ships, or is it used
hollow
as
ships.
an adjective for anything besides ships?
There's a few other references, but it's primarily ships. Anyway, okay.
No, these are great questions, though, which is why, you know, as I said, I'll look and see if I can find out. It's interesting because you were paying a lot of attention to what gets repeated. Because I remember in class at one point you also brought up an adjective that was often used to describe Odysseus. Mm-hmm. And I forget the adjective, but I remember you bringing it up.
Right.
Far-thinking Odysseus, or something to do with his ability to think.
There's so many little monikers attached to his name, godlike, but yeah.
Thanks to you, though, when we started reading the Aeneid, I pointed out, has anyone noticed what the adjectives are for Ulysses in this book? Criminal, evil, sly. I mean, it's hilarious how Virgil completely takes all the good qualities that Homer saw in Odysseus and turns them into negative qualities.
Well, that is an interesting debate about the Odyssey. Is Odysseus a good guy or is he a jerk? That does come up.
Yeah. Or it can, you know, depending on who's doing the reading.
Exactly, yeah.
From the Roman point of view, Odysseus is a threat to their values because they believed in community and consensus and team building. And here's somebody who returns without any of his men, who lies regularly.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the reasons why the Trojan horse is so successful and the Trojans lose is because of Odysseus's cleverness in coming up with this plan, right?
Mm-hmm. You mentioned individualism being really important. Maybe you could expand on that a bit.
Yeah, because when you read, say, the Aeneid, Aeneas lives his life in terms of something greater than him. It's his destiny
His
to
purpose
found
is...
Rome. He may fall in love with Dido, but he has to leave her because he has to go found Rome.
Duty.
Or he may want to kill Helen, but he can't kill her because he's got, his mother says, look, there are other things for you to do right now. You need to save your father, you need to save your son, because you have to go and found Rome. So over and over again, he cannot give way to his passions, he cannot give way to his ideas. Whereas Odysseus, those other men, they don't really, it's you mentioned the Clintons, and I thought, well, that's, there's at least one way in which I think Bill Clinton, Odysseus is not important because of the civilization of Ithaca or the community of Ithaca. Odysseus, beyond his family, it's him. It's all about him, his desires, his identity. He isn't subservient to something greater than him, which you see in other later epics. And in fact...
So what's he subservient to, his own happiness?
Well, for example, when Dante talks about Odysseus in the Inferno, he makes up a story where Odysseus he returns to Ithaca and he's not satisfied. He has to keep journeying, he has to keep voyaging, traveling, and he reaches sort of the ends of the earth, and he wants his crewmen to continue, and he says, crewmen, we are not animals, we need to find out more, don't be satisfied with just being submissive. And so they go, yay, and they continue, and they fall off the end of the earth and all go right up in hell, right? So Dante viewed that as suspicious, as sort of craving for knowledge, craving for more, and getting your men to follow you because you want more. What's in it for them? Nothing. But this is Odysseus needs them in order to travel. So...
they're using them.
They're using them, yeah. And whereas in Aeneas... they are using him. It's the opposite. The community uses him. The Romans need him. But over and over you'll have scenes where Venus, who's fighting for Rome, will say, well, if Aeneas must die, let my grandson, Iulius, live. He's just like a chain in a larger necklace, whereas Odysseus is the necklace. He's Ulysses. When I teach it, classes will vary enormously. Many of my classes prefer the kind of Roman, live for your country, don't be a liar, don't be a cheat, don't live for yourself. And others, will very much be in favor of this sort of individualistic, swaggering, larger than life. In a way, he's almost a model for the con man, who we're so fond of in American literature, don't you think? The person who just tells stories for the fun of it sometimes, because Odysseus doesn't just lie, but he's like an incredible fabricator where he'll just spin these yarns and you're captivated by it. And that's the other thing that Homer does with Odysseus that you don't see in subsequent epics, is he sets up a kind of link between Odysseus and the bards, the artists who are singing these songs. At the very end where he draws his bow and compares the bow to the lyre, that it's almost as if Homer in his way is saying that Odysseus in his own way as an artist is like the artist with his tale telling. He lives his life as if it were a work of art. We need him in order to create our stories, and he needs us in order to live his stories, but there's a kind of symbiosis that is based on the individual. I can't tell if you're buying this or not.
No, I am. No, it's beautiful. It's poetic what you're saying. Odysseus will visit shameful destruction on these men. I love that. Shameful
Isn't that beautiful?
Destruction.
So the wine blue sea you'll tolerate because shameful destruction. It's the thing about translation is sometimes there's hits and sometimes there's misses.
Exactly, yeah. Poseidon, he definitely gives him a hard time.
Yeah.
But he can't kill him. Is that right?
Because he's fated to live.
And that's
Free
the question is, so how does if a god's this powerful and yet a god can't work against fate?
Yes.
So where does fate come from?
Fate appears to be stronger than the gods, the three sisters who spin the fates, because there's a moment in the Aeneid where Zeus is trying to reconcile Juno to the fact that there's nothing she can do to kill Aeneas, and he says, look, my son Sarpedon my son in Troy was fated to die, and I'm Zeus, and there was nothing I could do.
Right.
Yeah. So the whole question of free will versus fate is something that haunts critics of these books.
Yeah.
I tend to think that there's a kind of symbiotic relationship, because you may be fated to die, but if you behave badly, the odds of you dying are pretty strong anyway.
Like, that's the thing is, can you if you live virtuously, are you not going to die?
Or if Odysseus wasn't so clever, or didn't control himself at the end, would he still manage to triumph over the suitors? Or is it just, he's the kind of, what is the relationship between the fate and the free will, between fate and free will, that I think is very interesting, very profound. Double determination, some critics call it, that you have your choices you make, but you're also fated.
This is so Macbeth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really.
If it were nothing but fate, how interesting would these books be? It's like, why even bother to read? So there has to be an element of doubt, of
free will.
Yeah.
Suffering and man's, and we're winding down here.
Yeah.
Just okay. Man is fated to suffer. A man of many sorrows is what Odysseus is.
And a man of many turnings also, resourceful. Maybe many turnings and many sorrows are connected, that in order to live a full life, you have to be willing to suffer.
Mm-hmm. But why can't you have a nice, full life without suffering?
Because then it's not full.
Well, you haven't experienced everything.
You haven't experienced everything. You haven't opened yourself to everything. If you live a kind of quiet, forgettable life, which seems antithetical to who Odysseus is, you may have a quiet life, but you certainly don't have a full life.
Yeah, and also if you've experienced the lowest lows, then you really can appreciate the opposite.
Yeah. It's like opening yourself to love. That as human beings, if you love someone, you're going to either you will die or that person will die. There's going to be loss. Every time I take in a new cat, I have to say, I hope
there's
I
going to be
outlive you, but
tragedy
it's going to
somewhere.
be tragedy, right? Better. The other thing is for as far as the Greeks were concerned, all they had was this life. Death. There was no heaven. There was no kind of something to look forward to. It was just monotonous. Terrible, as Achilles said, I'd rather be a slave than dead. So you had to make the most of what you had and hope that you would be remembered.
Yeah.
And there was no sort of transcendent bliss,
You're not working toward.
Yeah. By the time Virgil is writing, he's, there's a happier place in Hades where good people could go, but Homer hasn't. There's nothing like that for the Greeks. So you make the most of what you have. Many turning Odysseus, which I think again ties back to the theme of individuality, that we delight in his "Tell me, Muse, of the man of many ways."
There's a lot of crying.
Life is sad,
but there's a lot of crying in here, and the men cry their eyes out, and it's not a problem.
They do.
They're not thought of being as being effeminate.
Isn't that great that you can show your emotions and not have this sort of cultural stereotype of holding it in? And it's perfectly
seeming
fine.
Weak. It's not weakness.
Yeah. And these men were not weak, but they were able to feel openly, which tells. That's another reason for reading these books, is you get to look at our culture in a kind of mirror, and think, how come? Why is there this prohibition on crying that men have to experience now, when warriors at that time were able to feel it was just fine?
Yeah. It's not striking, but certainly it's you pay attention to that.
It's so again.
Refreshing.
If you were watching a Clint Eastwood movie, you wouldn't have Clint, suddenly
bawling his eyes out.
Right, that you have to go kill this person, and he would spend a few minutes tearing his hair out and crying. But there it was perfectly fine.
I love how they talk about sleep a lot, and the refreshing sleep. And it's God that grants the sleep. They always talk about the fact that it's that God's allowed me to sleep, because
Yeah.
I guess because it's such a wonderful escape and a refreshment.
Yeah, which, in my mind, I think they probably had a problem with insomnia just like we did, so they thought it was like, but
It's a gift.
sleep,
Yeah.
sleep also can represent the unconscious, because for me it's very interesting that at moments where Odysseus should be on top of things, like when his men are killing the oxen of the sun, he's sleeping, right? The gods put him to sleep. And is that because they're fated to do this? Or is that because, I don't know. But those moments where he falls asleep, I find very interesting.
Mm-hmm. You wanted to talk about Circe.
Yeah. Oh, partially because I've just finished. There's a classicist named Madeline Miller who's taking ancient Greek stories and turning them into wonderful novels. And she just came out with a book on Circe, which sort of presents... It's told from Circe's point of view as opposed to Odysseus's point of view, which one of the things I do as I read these books is I often try to put myself in, if Penelope were telling this story, how would she tell it?
Well, Margaret Atwood did one of those.
Ovid did it. He wrote a book, Briseis, and but anyway, back to Circe. Circe in both this book and in the Aeneid is interesting because she turns men into beasts, sort of brings out their worst characteristics. Pigs.
So they've gone to another island, right?
Yes, they're on her island, and she gives Odysseus's men a potion, and they're reduced to animals, even though they have, presumably still their minds. And in the Aeneid, Aeneas sort of sails around her islands, but he could hear the sounds of men who have been turned into wolves or pigs or whatever. And there's lots of references to Circe in certain chapters of the Aeneid. So her linking of sexuality with bestiality and her power as a woman, as a female, a sorceress. And you also, again, it's another of these moments where Odysseus lands on her island, and he stays with her for a year, and it's finally his men who says, "Hey, it's time to move on. We have to go." So, she's just an interesting character.
Does he kind of slay her as well, and she falls for him?
She lets him go.
He basically convinces her to turn him back into men.
He's told by the god Hermes. He's given this little herb called Molly, which Leopold Bloom, which Joyce later names Molly of Leopold Bloom. Yeah. And it's through Molly that he is able to keep her from having power over him.
That's right.
Yeah. But they kind of fall for each other afterwards. They're having such a good time.
Yeah.
I mean, that he loses a year with her. But then when he says, "Okay, I have to go," she explains to him, "Here's how you get to Hades. Here's what you have to do. Don't do this, do that." So,
why does he have to go to Hades?
Oh, I think for a number of different reasons. Hades is the center of the book, and Hades gives him the motivation he really needs in order to get back to Ithaca, because that's where he learns about the suitors. That's where he learns about his mother is dead, but his father is, sort of hanging on.
So it gives him a sense of urgency to get back, whereas
Exactly.
before he was kind of farting around, having a good time.
I joke, he's like a great procrastinator.
Yes.
Also. Yeah, it gives him the urgency to go back.
Okay. What's an epic simile?
An epic simile, all of those sections where Odysseus or someone else is compared to, say, a scene in nature, and the comparison will go on for a number of lines. And initially, when you think, here he is approaching Nausicaa, and he's being compared to a lion, and yet he has to be so careful when he approaches her. What's this doing here? Epic similes are ways in which you receive a different perspective on a scene or a character, and a more profound insight into what that scene or character is all about, which is why I always urge students to close read the epic similes. And you see them in the Odyssey, you see them in the Aeneid, you see them in Ovid, you see them in Dante. Every time you come across, this is like, and then there's a long, or this is as, and then there's a long.
Can you give us just one example?
When Odysseus and Penelope are having a conversation with one another, And you don't know if I mean, clearly Odysseus knows who Penelope is, but he can't tell her. We don't know what Penelope is experiencing, but we're told that she responds like snow melting on a cliff, with the west wind and the south wind coming into play. And with that, she never comes out and says, "Oh, Odysseus," she just weeps. But there's something about the suggestion of snow melting after a very hard frozen ice winter, that things are starting to shift and she's being able to feel again.
The renewal of
the
life.
renewal, exactly. Yeah. But his epic simile in the same passage is he feels pity for her, but his eyes are hard like horn or ivory. He can't show his feelings. He can't weep at
and
that
why can't
point.
he do that with her?
If he wept, wouldn't that reveal that he's Odysseus?
Oh, because he actually cared, and she would see. Oh, he.
No, because the whole plan has to do with, I mean, if she, as far as he's concerned, if she immediately finds out who he is, and remember he warns the nurse, "Don't betray me."
That's right. Because the nurse sees his scar.
Yeah, exactly.
And realizes it's him.
He's suspicious of everyone, just as she's suspicious of him. And from his, he thinks, well, what if she embraces me, and then the suitors find out I'm back and I'm dead?
Because I can't plan the slaughter.
I have to. Yeah. So she, I can't tell her because I can't be certain of her response. She has to think I'm just a beggar.
Yeah, like everyone else does. Yeah.
But the simile they use, his eyes are like horn or ivory. A little after that, and this is another enigmatic passage, she describes a dream where geese are killed by an eagle. And Odysseus says, well, that's just a prophecy that Odysseus is coming home soon. And she says, well, there are two gates for dreams. One is the gate of ivory for false dreams, and one is the gate of horn for true dreams. And this is a false dream. There's just a kind of play that's going on. But back to Odysseus's simile, unlike Penelope, who's described as melting, his eyes are hard like horn or iron. He has to keep himself under control. He can't show his feelings.
Okay, so to keep an iron grip on.
And I think, the sort of juxtaposition of the two similes is to give you insight into what the two characters are feeling as they talk to one another. So that's a very beautiful, I think, example of an epic simile. And there are so many others.
One more observation, and that is I love how different characters are all kind of either bloodied up or dirty or whatever, and they have a bath. The maids can clean them up. They oil them up with olive oil, and they come out of it, and they look like a god. I just love that little.
I know. Which one might suggest how people, I'm sure bathing like that wasn't a daily occurrence, so you probably did feel, as close as you ever came to being godlike at that time. But it's also interesting when Odysseus meets Nausicaa and she says, let me have my maidens bathe you. And he says, no.
Why does he say no?
It's not appropriate for young girls to bathe, ugly old Odysseus. But even more telling, when Penelope wants, as a guest, she says, let us give you a bath. And he says, no, don't let the maids bathe me. Only the old serving woman who was my nurse, she can bathe me. Even baths could be read in a number of different ways here, is giving you information. It's such a powerful, such an intricate, such a subtle work, even though it's oral. Even though, this comes from the 8th century BC when someone wrote down all these stories.
Why is it important again?
It is a foundation story for so many aspects of Western culture that to this day, you're able to go to a Quentin Tarantino movie and see elements of Odysseus in it.
That helps you understand, I guess, is what we're saying.
Yeah, where you read it and you have a deeper appreciation for the times we live in today, I think.
And boy, lots going on right now.
There's lots going on right now.
Thanks very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you. Wonderful interviewer.
I've been speaking to Katharine Streip, who's an associate professor in the Liberal Arts College at Concordia University in Montreal, Quebec. Thanks again.
Thank you.